Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm in the mood for recording a catch-up video again tonight. I actually just got back from school and I feel kind of tired right now. And I've also noticed that I have a bit of dark rings under my eyes and I'm like so I think this video is gonna be somewhat short. Really, well, I don't know, but in this video I'll be talking about 3 books, so which means after these 3 books I'll still have 6 more books to talk about. So without further ado, let's start with the first one. This is Beijing Doll by Chun. This book was originally in Chinese, translated into English by Howard Goldblatt. So Chun is a Chinese author and poet. I think this book was published originally in Chinese in 2002, and the translation was published in 2004. Beijing Doll is a semi-autobiographical novel, and the main character's name is also called Chun, aka Jiafu. So basically Jiafu is also the author's actual name. And the character in this book is working as a journalist under the name Chun. So yeah, very autobiographical. So Beijing Doll is a story that revolves around this character Chun, who is a teenage girl living in Beijing, and I think this story takes place sometime in the 90s, I believe. And basically it is written in the style that is very similar to a person's diary, a teenager's diary, where there is a very loose plot, if any. I think if you read it deeply, you might find a plot, but I think it's a very loose plot. It chronicles the life of this teenage girl as she goes through her life. Basically, the main things that constitute her life, the life of this girl named Chun or Jiafu, is going to school, and how she complains about not liking school, how she talks about not performing well in school, and also her going to all of these underground rock and roll scene in Beijing, because she's also working as a journalist, and so she's writing pieces about these events, the performance and the rock bands, and because of her involvement with the underground rock and roll scene, she ends up getting acquainted and befriending many of the people who are also active in this scene, which means that we also get to see her, hear her telling us her experience interacting with these people, most of them boys older than her, and how she ends up also getting quite intimate and having a lot of sex with these boys. So this book has tons of sex, and when I say tons, it's tons of sex. However, it's not graphic at all. Like, the sex is not described in detail, but you do end up seeing this character, the main character, getting into one sex, then another, and another, and another. So it's like, yeah, it does get repetitive in that sense. When I started reading this book, I had a bit of I would say apprehension about what I was about to expect, because this book was banned in China, I think, for a period of time because of its portrayal of sex among youths, and it just made me think of how sometimes when a book is described as being that way, usually that book is at most just being edgy. Or maybe it's not edgy to certain groups of people or certain demographics, but to me, it usually means that the book is just edgy. It doesn't really go that deep, that that dirty into the details of sex, which means that it would very likely not catch my interest. But what's interesting about this book is that while yes, the main character is in fact acting in a very edgy, rebellious teenage way, there is a bit of self-awareness, I think, that would pop up once in a while in this book, reminding us that the protagonist sort of knows that she is kind of young and stupid. What I usually don't like is whenever I read a story that is narrated by a very young protagonist or a teenager protagonist. Now, this book is, in fact, narrated by Chun, the main character herself. When a book is narrated by a very young protagonist, and they tend to, and when they get to the part where they start to talk about something profound, like philosophizing about life, or thinking about certain concepts that are abstract but deep, usually they would sort of fumble and fail, and I, as a reader, would wince. And that kind of moment did happen here and there in this book, but like I said, it had that little bit of self-awareness to remind us that yes, even though the character does occasionally philosophize or talk about deep things, somehow the character also knows that they lack certain insight, which does provide a bit of that reflective aspect in this book, that reflective capability of I don't know, of the character, or maybe of the author. I think it's probably both, because this book is kind of semi-autobiographical, so yeah, maybe a bit of both. But anyway, now this book is narrated by a teenager who is constantly complaining about how people just don't understand her, and she would go into depression sometimes. She would go into bouts of rebelliousness, and she would get into all of these sex, and that's kind of like the through line in this book, like how Chun, the character, is trying to tell us that she is experiencing something that people around her just cannot understand. And I suppose, as the reader of the book, you should be able to understand better than the people around her. But the irony is that something about the writing, it feels kind of opaque. That no matter how much the character narrates her story to me, I also can't really understand where she is coming from, like truly. I mean, I could probably sort of grasp here and there as to why she's potentially feeling this way. I mean, she does show certain inclination towards the more artistic side of things, for example, and that is one of the things that are not that is not understood by like her parents in the book. But overall, I still felt that I could not understand his character, which I thought was a pretty ironic thing. um, and so yeah, even though I thought that aspect was just kind of made the book feel kind of meh a little bit, it also made it feel kind of interesting also, like, oh, okay, there's a bit of that interesting interaction between me and the book. So I'm like, okay, I don't think I would experience that in many books out there. So in that sense, this book is kind of interesting and something worth remembering. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Beijing Doll by Chun. Have you read this book? Let me know what you think about it. Now, the next one is a novella. This is called The Only Harmless Great Thing by Brooke Bolander. This book is an alternate history, science fiction, speculative fiction, I think is more accurate. And this book was published in 2018. And it is about it is set in the early 20th century in the US. And the story joins two historical events together to form one single narrative. So with those two events, one of it would be the scandal involving radium girls, in which a number of factory workers, female factory workers, had their lives endangered because the company neglected to tell them about the risk of the materials they were working with, which were radioactive, and that caused the workers to become really sick, and some even died, like many died. And so the other historical event is the execution of Topsy the elephant by electrocution. So in actuality, those two events, they don't really occur like very closely to each other. Like the execution of the elephant, I think it occurred at least 10 years before the radium girls scandal. Now this book, it connects those two events together, in which there is a sort of like a new plot being formed from that combination. So basically what is going on is that the government, I think in this book, I think it's the government, they are trying to set up a sign that tells that a certain area is dangerous. And they're trying to use glowing elephants for that, because somehow in this book, elephants are related with the dangers of radioactivity, at least in the collective minds of the society in this universe. And so we see one human character she's interacting with the elephant character, trying to get this elephant to cooperate, I believe, but somehow this elephant does not. And you could sort of guess what happens from there. Although, to tell you the truth, I don't particularly remember very well what the plot would eventually what the plot really is, like, because I thought that the plot is sort of loose in here also. But anyway, I think that the premise is very interesting. Okay, the fact that it uses two significant historical events to convey a story, and at the same time to convey certain commentaries on some issues such as women's rights, animal cruelty, labor exploitations. I thought that was a very interesting and creative choice. That being said, I was not particularly appreciative or rather I didn't really like how the execution of the idea happened, because okay, one thing I didn't enjoy about the book is that even though it is quite ambitious in trying to comment on all these different issues, I find that its treatment on these issues are quite superficial. Much of the things that it wants to convey about, say, women's rights, for example, or labor exploitation, are things that I would say most readers would know already, and it doesn't seem to offer a very fresh perspective on any of these things. It doesn't offer something new when it comes to the issue of treatment of animals, for example. So basically, it doesn't have any refreshing bit. Another thing that I didn't particularly enjoy is how black and white this book kind of feels. While in its attempt to tell a story that comments on these social issues, it uses its characters in such a way that you can clearly see that there is a good character and there are good characters and then there are bad characters. And the good and the bad characters, they just seem so black and white, very much opposed, and you don't really get so much complexity with either side of the characters, which I thought really takes away the fun bit of the story. It would have been much more interesting if we can see, like, for example, the human characters, the good human characters, and also the elephant. I mean, we obviously know what's going to happen to the elephant. Okay, that's not a spoiler. But these characters are painted as the good guys, but somehow we don't really see much beyond them. We don't see much of them beyond as being or as functioning as the mouthpiece for the commentaries. And similarly with the bad guys, like the company that is poisoning the workers, and also or the party that is responsible for the abuse of the animal. They're represented by the boss of the bosses, the men who work at this company. and they are painted as someone who has totally no sympathy, no humanity, and it just seems so shallow to me. But not only that, though, I would like to say, the main, well, I wouldn't say the main thing, but one of the important issues that this book wants to put forward is, of course, women's rights, right? Women's agency, for example. And there's actually kind of like a subplot or sub-narrative in this book, which involves the folklore from the point of view of the elephants. So I think the folklore is inspired by how elephants are kind of led by female elephants in real life, in their groups in the wild. And so the folklore of the elephants has a female elephant acting as the hero, and therefore the antagonist of this female elephant is of course a male elephant. And it just seems so obvious that there is this kind of black and white between female versus male, and it doesn't seem very complex. Again, maybe it's because it's folklore, and folklore can be kind of simplified sometimes, but still it doesn't really offer something new, which is definitely something that would gobble up. So yeah, an interesting premise, but I would say the execution was a bit lackluster than this one. So I didn't really enjoy this. I gave this one, I don't know, 1.5 out of 5 stars. Anyway, moving on to the next book. So just now I talked about stuff like a story that talks about women's bodies, women's agency, right? This book does that in an incredible way. I was absolutely floored by how wonderfully written this book is. This is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, and she's a Mexican writer. This book was originally written in Spanish, translated into English by Sophie Hughes, and I think it was published in 2017, and the translation was into 2020. So in this book, the story is set in a village in Veracruz in Mexico. And at the beginning of this book, we learn that a person has died, and the person is a woman. She is called as the witch by the villagers. She's not a particularly popular person in that village. And so she dies, and her body has been horribly mutilated, and her body is discovered at a canal in a very much undignified way. And so the novel pretty much takes the form of a kind of like a mystery in uncovering who killed that witch. And as we read this book, as we go through the chapters, we learn slowly who killed the witch. But at the same time, this novel, it also slowly introduces us to this character of the witch. Like, who is the witch? And why would someone want to kill them? And right at the beginning, we kind of have a bit of a sense as to why this witch, or why this woman who is called the witch, is killed. And we also learn a bit more about some characters who live in this village, particularly this one family who somehow has certain involvement with the witch. Their involvement with the witch has something to do with the personal thing that happened within this family. Okay, I don't want to tell you much about it because I only discovered it from reading this novel as well. But basically, some kind of something happened in this family which sort of has something to do with the death of the witch. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say to you. And as we read about their story, we learn about the kind of attitude that many of the characters have in the village, especially towards women. But I would say it's not just towards women, but towards the idea of men versus women. Their attitude towards sex, towards gender. And coupled with the fact that many people in this village are very poor, which drive some of them to commit certain things. And I really enjoy how this book, while it is trying to slowly trickle down information to us about who killed the witch, it is also in a very masterful way comments on how attitudes on sex and gender, particularly of a misogynistic flavor, and related to that, machismo, and poverty kind of interacts with one another, which may lead to or cascade to certain things, certain actions, so there is this very intersectional discussion of socioeconomic backgrounds, and also ideas on sex and gender, which I thought was really fascinating. And what's interesting about how it discusses the aspects of misogyny and machismo, for example, right, is that it talks about it in terms of power. And it's not just the power dynamics that exist between men and women in this book. It also talks about the power dynamics that exist between, for example, men versus men who looks like women, or men who are regarded as women. So the power discussion is not necessarily just between biological men versus biological women, but also, for example, men versus women like men, and that is something that is really subject to the person's own definition, like what they consider as less man-like or more woman-like, and those things would eventually lead to this kind of skewed idea on how the power dynamics should be. And because of this, I would say, faulty power dynamics, bad things happen. So this book has tons of violence. It has tons of sex. So if you are squeamish about those things, maybe you should kind of be careful, or rather be cautious about reading this book. So that's just a bit of a heads up. But I would say that the story is very craftily written. Another aspect about this book that I like. So as we slowly learn about who killed the witch, right? And we start to develop this kind of idea of who are the bad people, who are the good people, who are the people we should sympathize with, who are the people that we should loathe in this book, who are the antagonists, who are the protagonists. The book also takes care in really giving us the story of everyone, both the people that are the good guys and the bad guys, making them very much human, right? As if it is trying to give them this opportunity to defend themselves, to justify themselves, like some kind of a court, for example. And that aspect of this book was something that I really enjoyed. It was not something that was found in a previous book that I talk about. And the thing is, even with that, you still can see, who are the people to, for example, root for, who are the people who are in the right, who are the people who are in the wrong. But because it gives these characters the chance to have their story being reproduced onto the pages of this book, you get a fuller sense of the book's reality, and therefore it makes the book more immersive, it makes the character more real, it makes the story much stronger. So 5 out of 5 stars for Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. This is my first book by this author, and I am quite excited to try her other works. I've heard of this book so many times on social media, on BookTube, on Bookstagram. Lots of people have been talking about it and raving about it, and I was like, I really gotta try this book. And unfortunately, before this, I couldn't find it in any used bookstore. So one day I saw this book, new copy, and I just like, okay, let's just buy it. And oh my gosh, that was such a wonderful investment. This book is entertaining. It depends on how you define entertaining. I was entertained by the good writing. Okay. This book is powerful, and it is also very cathartic, because I would say on a personal level, I feel like I could connect with this book. Certain things that the book says speak to my personal experience, so I also appreciate that aspect of this book. It just goes to show you like how books can be magical. Anyway, those are the books that I want to talk about in this video. I will record, I would say, 2 other catch-up recent reads to talk about the remaining 6 books. But for now, I think I'm gonna go to sleep, and I'll see you again in a different one, in a different video. So take care, thanks for watching, and bye.